news because it's piled up since yesterday. First, my apologies for the technical issues we've been having here. So IC&E has this. We have this air fiber thing that they did for us, and what had happened was, um, huh? Last night, PDN's publisher, Rendradi Celestin Tiaco, she's a round woman. She apparently was smoking a cigarette atop the PDN building, and she farted, and it melted the antenna where our air fiber thing is lodged from. And so ITN had to spend all of today fixing it up, like, reworking the steel and whatever, because of the damage it received from the chemical, like that exposure from Rendradi. It sabotage, yes. From a competitor, I guess. But that's so. I'm just kidding, of course. Like, I don't know if she actually went up there to fart. I'm pretty sure it would melt the steel antenna, but it's fixed now. So thank you, ITN, for taking care of that all day today. We really appreciate it. If it was Docomo, we wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't send. They wouldn't even. We'd be on hold still with their stupid system. So we actually have a very full newscast, and before we start that, may we ask if we could just, if you could press share at the bottom of your screen and share this live cast to your timeline, and also share to any groups that you're in. We would very much appreciate that because it boosts our numbers and it works every time. So thank you very much for that. Before you get into your Friday night, just understand that at around 12 tonight, there will be checkpoints everywhere. Like you know how the Guam Police Department used to do checkpoints in like maybe a couple of areas, but then if you were clubbing, yeah. If you were clubbing, you would you'd be able to go from like one end to one and like beat the checkpoints. That's not going to be possible tonight. So they have checkpoints from PD to Jigo on Marine Corps Drive, checkpoints from all of Route 8, which is here and again at the corner of where we're at, the traffic light on where, what's the name of this stupid place? Where like Feathers and Fins is, where our building is, where Faith Bookstore is, and across the street is Venue, all the way to Barragata, the tri-intersection, and then from that tri-intersection all the way to the Micronesia Mall, and then from the Chief Kapua traffic light all the way to Chalampago Ordot. They have every single corridor, major corridor of this island covered in checkpoints that begin tonight around 12 o'clock. So just, mind your speed. Don't drive drunk or drugged. And if you have a blood alcohol content, or if they smell alcohol on you, or if they see your fuzzy eyes like glazed at windshields, they could pull you over. They could send you to jail for your own safety. So just be careful tonight. The other bit of news we got from the government of Guam today, straight from the governor's office, is that tax refunds are being released. So the fiscal team managed to get out about 1,000 tax refunds. I don't know if they sent it out yet, but about 1,000 tax refunds that cover all A status returns through January 30th will be paid out, compliments of the Leon Guerrero administration. So that's good news all around for everybody who's filed and is A status through January 30th. So if you were January 28 or January 29 and you didn't receive your refund in that round when those were released, it was likely because your return wasn't marked as A status, and there's a possibility that it has become A status since, so you may be getting your refund that way. Last night and today, we, in our efforts, in our attempts to get the news out, we were able to cover the IIAAG news, and then more news regarding 3 cases that we are going to rehash tonight on the Luke sisters, Tamika Nauta, and the disappearance of Deandra Borja. But before we do that, I want to talk about the Henry Alvendia case. So give me a second to puff the cigarette. Again. So Henry Alvendia is a motherfucker. He is he wasn't the mastermind, but he was the highest level official convicted in the largest and most corrupt police corruption case the federal government has tried in the history of this island. And when we say police corruption, we're talking about customs officers and those associated with the customs agency, and those who were co-conspirators in a scheme back in about a decade ago to defraud the government of Guam of fair and honest services. What happened was, well, what was on the record was that Henry Alvendia, some other customs officers, and some revenue agents at the Department of Revenue and Taxation made a deal with a couple who owned a few businesses on Route 16. They were tired of waiting for their merchandise and their inventory to be taken off the docks over at the seaport, where things were rather slow, and they, just like any other person on this island who tries to do things the normal way by the process, they get screwed. So they've been getting screwed over these years. Their merchandise would go bad, and so they were approached by some customs officials who said, "Hey, we know somebody who can help you out. If you do us a favor, we'll do you a favor." And so over a period of years, this couple was paying money to customs agents in order to get their merchandise out of the port faster than it had been, which would, if they were just doing their jobs, it would have been by a normal process. What turns out happening is that couple, when they get caught, they agree to cooperate with the federal government, and it leads to the takedown of the person who was at the top of the food chain, at least who was indicted and eventually convicted by plea agreement, and that was Henry Alvendia, who was sort of like the special assistant to the director of customs at the time. He was one of the highest, at the time, probably the most powerful customs official, except for the director of customs. In order to avoid jail time, because he was facing 85 years in jail, 85 years in jail. In order to avoid it, he goes along with a scheme created by Homeland Security Investigations in a target. Let me just turn this down because it's pretty fucking loud. So he targets a couple named, and their names are Raymond Martinez Jr. and at the time Juanita Moser, who has since become Juanita Martinez. They're a married couple who had no police record of anything. They were not on anyone's radar for drug trafficking. They were not known drug users, nothing. When their house was raided, there were no drugs found anywhere. They were introduced to a conspiracy created by Henry Alvendia to smuggle methamphetamine from California to Guam. And if you listen, so this is an important case to us because Kandit, this was the very first thing we covered. Aside from the corruption of Ray Sonorio and the Calvo administration, the very first thing we covered was this Alvendia corruption scandal. And so a little on this, from 6 months ago, is a video that we have of that newscast where Johnny Rosario lays out. We'll play the first few minutes of that. Why don't you go ahead, Cello, and play that video?
Thank you for joining Candid News for the final installment of our three-part special series on the Alvendia corruption scandal. I'm Johnny Rosario, and I'm bringing you this story because once, many years ago, I was where those defendants currently are. Many parts of the story are similar, but there's one stark contrast. When I stood in their shoes, I was actually guilty. Raymond Martinez and Juanita Moser are not drug dealers. Mixed with the fate of Mr. Alvendia, this is a story fit for a courtroom drama. It's a story of the power placed in one man by the political elite to corrupt the system and to manipulate our fears of the growing drug trade into a false sense of security by concealing its supply chain. The victims of this corruption? An innocent couple used to scapegoat the cover-up of Henry Alvendia's misdeeds. hundreds of people who have gone to jail without ever being given their right to face their accusers or to spend one day in trial, and the integrity of the justice system itself. The search for the truth about police corruption on Guam and the fatal flaws of our justice system didn't end when Henry Alvin Diaz's decade of decadence made way for his federal corruption conviction. He was no more remorseful of his crimes than a politician who apologized 21 times for a crime he now blames on everyone but himself. Instead of helping to root out corruption by offering up his boss, former Customs Chief Ralph Scambaluri, he offered up people who thought he was their friend. And instead of ending the cycle of police corruption by bringing down the fruit of its poisonous tree, he allowed it to flourish in the worst possible way. Henry Alvin Diaz used his know-how as a corrupt cop to dupe friends and former colleagues who were on his case. He duped them to take their scent off of Ralph Scambaluri and from the actual trafficking of the majority of the drugs into this island. But it won't be enough for the terms of his plea agreement to simply say that there's nothing on Scambaluri. In order for Mr. Alvin Diaz to secure his freedom from the consequences of his own corruption scandal, he decided to corrupt the system even more. So the corrupt cop didn't allow the scales of justice to rebalance. He led the government into framing and entrapping a couple into criminal activity that they never committed, a conspiracy they were not predisposed to plan without the crime's conspirators, the United States government itself, and the corrupt cop it is protecting. Now that the scales of justice await 12 citizens in a jury of Raymond Martinez and Juanita Moser's peers. Their second trial in what has been their 3-year nightmare ends with closing arguments by both the prosecution and the defense on Monday. Once Fred Black finishes his rebuttal, Monday night, Judge Francis Tidinko Gatewood would hand the case over to those 12 citizens, each bringing with them a unique perspective of life on Guam. Each of them has a story. Perhaps some of them have been affected by substance abuse. Perhaps some of them have been victims of corruption or abuse of police power. Maybe some of them have been falsely accused of something. Whatever the case, all 12 of them have sat in that jury box, listening intently as the evidence was presented. Many times, it's what's left unsaid that may have the greatest impact. And in this case, 2 crucial points of evidence never made it to them. What's worse is that lies were entered into evidence. The jury's job is now...
So this Henry Alvin Diaz, this what we call the Alvin Diaz corruption scandal. This guy was at the heart of, one, the largest police corruption scandal in Guam history, and 2, when we did the research, what looks like one of the largest drug operations in island history, as in tons of drugs coming in through the seaport. We even did an entire expose about the number or the pounds of drugs coming into this island and how it is not possible, even with the efforts of the Mandania Drug Task Force, that silly little pussy operation, when you do the numbers and when you see what the postal inspectors were bragging about, compared to the usage on this island, what we estimated to be the usage on this island, it isn't the airport and isn't the postal service where the majority of the drugs are coming in, but through the seaport. And in one of the federal filings, there is a federal report showing that in one of the openings of containers, Henry Alvin Diaz went to the Valencia's shops to open a container for them and broke the customs seal. 4 eyewitnesses, as these were workers for the Valencias, they told 2 other customs officers that he broke the customs seal, he opened the container, and so you'd see, mountains and mountains of boxes. They're all similar looking boxes because they're all Marlboro cigarettes from the Philippines. Henry Alvin Diaz removes one box that doesn't look like any of the other boxes. And he closes the container back up, he puts another lock on it, and he splits, leaves with this one box. And the going suspicion by federal authorities at that time was what he removed was drugs. And he had been doing this over and over again into the containers that were being brought in from the Philippines, and that there was way more to this story than Henry Alvandia's involvement, and that when you go up the ladder, when you go up the food chain, the sea importing of methamphetamine, using corruption at the customs agency. So this guy, he was facing 85 years for the crimes listed in the indictment. He signs a plea agreement. He turns federal snitch. He makes criminals out of people by setting them up by a scheme concocted by Homeland Security investigations. The trial that Johnny was talking about ends up with the jury actually thinking the same thing that Johnny was talking about. There were too many unanswered questions about their culpability, about their involvement, because all of it was based on the testimony of the most corrupt police officer who has faced federal indictment, Henry Alvandia. And so now, yesterday, Henry Alvandia, or the day before, he was sentenced for the crimes he committed. His sentencing was postponed for the past, 2019, I think, for the past 4 years. It's been moved, it's been continued because of his testimony in the Martinez and Moser case. So the Martinez and Moser case finally finished in California, where they signed a plea agreement, but not to any of those drug charges, but for, I can't remember the name of the charge, but it had to do with making a phone call related to a conspiracy. And that was the only thing that could stick, that prosecutors could make stick. They faced 2 trials on Guam. Both times the jury could not find them guilty because there were too many unanswered questions. And this guy, Henry Alvandia, Fred Black, the prosecutor for the federal government, sings his praises and says, he's been the most cooperative, whatever. Cooperative in what? What did he do? Set a couple of people up? Juries couldn't even find them guilty. You had to move the trial over to California just so you could save face here on Guam that you lost 2 major trials. And then Judge Francis Tydenko Gatewood, tries to make this, impassioned whatever about corruption. Great message you sent, Judge, to all the corrupt people on this island, giving him 12 months when he should have done 85 years. It's a travesty of justice on this island that Henry Alvandia is going to spend only 12 months and 1 day in prison for being the most corrupt police officer this island has ever seen, indicted in federal court. Bravo, Fred Black. You're a fucking genius. And Judge Francis Tydenko Gatewood, lay off that turkey. So, there's that. And then there's this situation with Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano. And I was watching this investigative report by Chris Barnett with KOAM, who was questioning Senator Taitano, or Senator Marsh's, what is her name? And it went back and forth between what Chief Justice Catherine Merriman called her at her own inauguration. So she was the Honorable Kelly Marsh. And then what the Speaker called her, the Honorable Kelly Marsh Taitano. And so he went and did this whole interview asking her, what is your name? And so she had this long and convoluted answer about what her name was. This is emblematic of the problem with Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano. You can't get a straight answer from her. So in coverage that we've been bringing to you regarding the Hagåtña Master Plan, over which she has an oversight responsibility, and in this story that we're doing about her inherent conflicts of interest because her husband, Tyrone Taitano, is the Director of Statistics and Plans, and just out of nowhere attacks the Hagåtña Master Plan, and his colleague, Lacia Casil, who's the Director of the Hagåtña Redevelopment and Restoration Authority. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. And it all revolves around this one contract that the consultant putting the plan together, and as of now it's that the conceptual design phase is done, and now outreach and the zoning and all these other processes need to come into play, including the actual planning and the implementation, construction, all that stuff, right? What we're looking at is, aside from the military buildup, the largest program management or the largest program for construction requiring management on this island. By far, this is the hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent if this plan is implemented. And this falls under, Tyrone Taitano, the director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, has been making moves to cancel out HRRA's jurisdiction over this plan and move everything, the procurement of all this stuff, over to his agency. He even was successful in getting an executive order signed that skirts the procurement law and takes procurement authority away from Claudia Akfaji over at General Services Agency and moves it over to the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, with a specific caveat allowing for sole source procurement if a consulting firm hires a certain number of disabled workers, which now seems to favor only one local company, of which, these are known friends of Tyrone and Kelly Taitano. Things get sticky because the Hagåtña Master Plan falls within the oversight of Tyrone Taitano's wife, Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano, or Senator Kelly Marsh, or Senator Kelly Marsh Kautz. It's all. So she used to be married to I think it was a David Kautz or something. I can't remember. His brother was busted for bringing in 1,000, or being one of the co-conspirators in an attempt to bring 1,000 grams of methamphetamine into this island, and I think she got rid of his ass a little bit later. And then she met Tyrone Taitano, the future director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans. So we talked to Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano about these inherent conflicts of interest, because we wanted to get to the bottom of what is it that what is motivating her in this effort to get the Hagåtña Master Plan under her husband's purview, and for which she will have oversight, meaning a conflict of interest will exist in her ability to conduct proper oversight over the financial affairs of a program that would potentially cost hundreds of millions of dollars to taxpayers, and probably in federal grants. And so why don't we play that video of the interview we had with Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano yesterday, and then I'm going to point out a couple of things.
Oversight as my vice chair of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. We keep on looking for shorter ways to refer to that.
I know. It's a really long name.
Okay, so here's something that Rita Sprinkless, if you caught her hearing, and we're just about to go into session and hopefully nominate her, that will have 2 board members in, maybe even 4, and they will be fully impaneled. They can start doing some real work with the impaneled board. But she was very, very cute. Like, we loved her suggestions. So she said, the acronym for it is HRRA. She said, we just need to start referring to it as hurrah. So we were all on board with that. But anyway, to get back to her letter.
Yes.
I would have to call that letter up. In some of those communications, they've been to the governor or so, and so I have not received them yet myself. That letter might be referring to from the previous administration that last year, if we're talking about the same letter and the same issues,
yes,
that the last administration had brought up these concerns. And so I believe what's happening this time around is just, again, in that baseline information and moving forward, letting the governor know that those 13 issues had or had not been addressed, so that as we move forward, we know that there were concerns last year, and we know the status of where they are now in case we want to pick any of them up or not. I'd have to look at the letter specifically to give you a more, detailed and accurate answer.
Sure, and thank you for being careful about that. Are you satisfied then with Lacia Casil's response to those 13 concerns that was given March 22nd, I think 3 days after BSP's concerns were written to the governor?
Well, I have not seen that letter. If it was received by the office of the governor, they did not pass it on to me. So I'm very open to seeing it. I think more information I can see about the process, more I can help
Okay.
So once I see the letter, I'll definitely be interested in reading through it to see how Ms. Castile responded to it, and how we can move forward from there.
Thank you. So I hope you can appreciate our big things are here at Kandit, our government corruption and sexual assault against children and women. And so I hope you will appreciate that when stories like these or when issues like these, like the largest development plan right after the military buildup on this island comes up, and whenever there are whenever correspondences arise, whenever decisions are made, whenever questions are asked, we're going to be very interested in understanding this because we're trying to be watchdogs for the people here.
Yeah, and that's why I'm interested. Like some of the questions that I've had is I want to make sure that over the 15 and 20 years, our understanding of things have changed, our social expectations have changed, and so we want to make sure that as we move forward with the plan, whenever it's the right time to do so, whether it's now or whether it's sometime in the future, we want to make sure that that plan appropriately considers climate change, sea level rise, and those sort of issues. So I'm on board with you in that we want to be watching this and making sure that it's addressing as many interests as we know of at this point in time.
And there are ex-official members of the Hagåtña hurrah, or whatever we called it.
Hurrah! Yeah.
There are ex-official members, which include the Bureau of Statistics and Plans and its Guam Coastal Management Program. And that's why they had the opportunity to interject with those 13 areas. There would be GWA and GPA, of course. I mean, they're the Environmental Protection Agency. So understanding that this is a very comprehensive, not just a project management, but a program management area. And I think that's why the IDIQ went to Matrix, because that's sort of their specialty. And like you said, it's been through other IDIQs, but it was fair and square procured as the IDIQ for the Hagåtña Master Plan. And we've been following it, and everything has looked above board and as positive as possible moving forward with the vision of whoever was the governor at the time. And so understanding that Governor Lilian Guerrero wants to move forward with the Hagåtña Master Plan, I'm not sure what changes she wants to make, because maybe her vision differs from the previous governor. But this is something we're definitely going to watch. Johnny, do you have any questions about this? No. And lastly, Senator, regarding the Hagåtña Master Plan and
Can I just add in there?
Sure.
And I don't know the complete landscape myself. Like I said, it's a lot to learn, and especially with all the moving parts, all the moving players over a 15-20-year period is a lot.
Yes.
But so I think that's a very good point. There are a whole lot of ways that the Department of just these different agencies that are connected with public works, land management, that they are all supposed to be weighing in. But I think also for the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, they're one of those entities that with any land use plan, they're expected to review it for the benefit of the community. But I appreciate that you noted that as official members, there were a whole lot of people who have opportunities to weigh in.
Yes. Senator, are you able, let's say issues come up with the Bureau of Stats and Plans involvement in this Hagåtña Master Plan, and questions are raised regarding its involvement or its perceived attempt to micromanage the HRRA in the development of the Hagåtña Master Plan. Are you able to take a step back and to conduct oversight of that agency and ask those tough questions, or relinquish your chair in such an oversight capacity if tough questions like that come up?
Well, there are a lot of instances where those kind of issues come up. Like, let's say anything that comes up to the Bank of Guam, Um, and so I've been very cognizant of that. Like when I was asked to be a member of one of the senator's committees that has oversight over BSP, I immediately checked with legal to make sure that that was an appropriate thing to do. And, you know, those things are very important to me. So I'm definitely trying to keep it on my radar. And if anything needs to be where I need to recuse myself or I need to pass something to my vice chair, then I will certainly do so because I care about these projects. And I want to see the best that's done with them. So, like I said, if we're
She's lying. So there were a few times in that interview when she said that she had not seen the letter, she's not familiar with the letter. She's lying. She's had at least 3 meetings together with her husband in the governor's chambers where they discussed this very letter that her husband sent to the governor about Lacia Castile, and then the letter that Lacia Castile wrote to the governor in response to these supposed concerns. And so the question is, why is she lying? Why is she lying about her familiarity with this letter? If you look at the sort of key points, these 13 points that they discuss, supposedly coming from the Guam Coastal Management Program, and that Tyrone Taisano says, you know, we're not covered by the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority, a couple things stick out. One is that they actually did cover those points in the Hagåtña Master Plan. The next thing is that I was actually mistaken when I mentioned this earlier. I said that the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, Tyrone Taisano's agency, is an ex-official member of the Hagåtña Master Plan's development. They're not. They're not even an ex-official member yet. Matrix Design Group reached out to the Bureau of Statistics and Plans and Guam Coastal Management Program to get their thoughts on it because of the significant role that they play, especially in the regulatory portions of the development of this Hagåtña Master Plan, or the implementation of the Hagåtña Master Plan. So HRRA went out of its way to get BSP's comments. They weren't even ex-official members. The third thing is this whole GWA discussion, which Senator Kelly Marsh says she's not too familiar with. She's lying. She's had 3 different meetings with the governor about this, where the GWA question comes up. And the GWA thing is, this is the relocation of the Hagåtña wastewater treatment plant, or what they call the Hagåtña sewage treatment plant, the thing that makes Agana stink, basically, the one that makes Agana smell like shit throughout the day, because it's actually shit. They call it effluent, or yeah, I think it's called effluent. Basically, shit flowing out into the sea and like swirling back into East Hagåtña Bay, which is a dead bay already because of the jet skis, and so there are no cleaners in the ocean, like natural cleaners in the ocean, because all of the fish stocks and the wildlife, the balati and everything that cleans the ocean in that bay, it's not there. So it's a super polluted bay. Don't ever take your kids to swim there because they'll start like growing fins or something. So according to the stipulated order that GWA has with the Environmental Protection Agency, with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, they're supposed to be relocating the Hagåtña wastewater treatment plant to a different location, to PD. So that's why Matrix Design Group included that recommendation as part of the change. They didn't just make that up. And yet they're using that as leverage against the HRRA. Why are they fighting so hard using false information to take this Hagåtña Master Plan away from where the legislature says the Hagåtña Master Plan needs to be, with the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority? What is their interest here? We're trying to find this out, but things get sneakier and sneakier with lies coming from Senator Kelly Taisano Marsh, who is the oversight chairman for this whole thing. And she talks about the conflict of interest and how she'll have the Speaker of the Legislature, who is her vice chairman, take over, but that's not possible when she is attempting to micromanage this whole thing on a daily basis. What is she going to do? Relinquish her committee every single day? that she has questions regarding the. She says she just has these questions. No, she and her husband have an agenda to take over the Haggadah Master Plan. And when hundreds of millions of dollars are involved in its implementation, we are going to ask tough questions about it. But this is not the first time Senator Kelly March Taitano has tried to pull the wool over us as citizens and as voters when she was running for senator. So remember the death of Xavier Akima, the boy from Father Dueña's school who was swept out because of a storm surge at the San Carlos Falls hike that he was on with his classmates. And sadly, he perished. And there was a big controversy about whether the government of Guam did what it should have done and what it could have done in order to save that boy's life. Was there a possibility that had they done more, that this boy would still be alive today? He would have been found somewhere and not miles away from where he was lost, because he was swept by the raging waters through the rivers at the San Carlos Falls. On the first day, there was minimal response ordered by the governor at the time, Eddie Calvo, and there was a political rally going on for the Republicans and for Ray Tenorio for governor. On the second day, someone still didn't get the message that more should have been done. Then there was the third day. So there was a camp built at this area where the family and the friends of Xavier Akima were waiting. And why don't we go ahead and play that video in the background, and I'll keep talking so that people can see that there were candidates who were stopping by, giving water and, talking to the families, volunteering to help with the surge, et cetera, et cetera. For all of the BS that Senator Kelly March Taitano said about children and the future and all of that, she was seen by family members who talked about this pretty loudly, leaving her mansion in that area, in the Nimitz Hill area where this camp was, to go to political functions. She passed by, didn't honk, didn't wave, didn't offer any sort of support to this family. And this is something that's hard. They remember this. This family remembers how they were ignored in their time of need. And so there's this disconnect between what the senator says and what the senator does. And many times the disconnect between what the senator says and what the truth is, which is, how could we ever trust our political leaders if they just lie to our faces? And the fact that she could just, blah, 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 I have no idea what she said in 8.5 minutes of interview. And any time she answered a question, it was just like, good Lord. Did she say anything in response to the actual question? None. It's just, I don't know, she should be ashamed of herself. And if she can do that, if she can just ignore the plight of a kid, imagine what more she'll ignore. Especially during this time, this very difficult time for Guam, when every single day there seems to be a new thing. There seems to be a new crime being exposed that happened against children. From the JROTC instructor over at George Washington High School, Manjo Quintanilla, to the principal, Linda Hernandez Avila, who was accused of covering it up or of not reporting it when she was supposed to the Mount Carmel case with a 12-year-old girl raped by one of the workers there, and the cover-up that happened over at Mount Carmel and with the Archdiocese of Agana. Elements of the Archdiocese of Agana. Everything, this whole uproar in the community started with the Paul Mothnis case and how he raped a 10-year-old girl. And how the parole board allowed this to happen when they paroled him before having all the information that they should have had. But it seemed more and more like this was the case of the cozying up of convicted felons with the parole board's chairwoman and their sophist message of God, and just a bunch of and kids have been suffering this entire time because of it. And before I get to the more current events of crimes against children, let's just recap some of the things that haven't yet been completely solved, or like call into question our confidence in the government to deliver justice for people. And so I talked about the Luke sisters and how we arrived at, it was months ago, or a few weeks ago, we did a whole expose on how the FBI is looking at a guy named Joseph Acosta Crisostomo, who is a convicted murderer, um, and he's serving prison time. The guy will never admit to his involvement in the disappearance of the Luke sisters, but we are fairly certain that if the FBI is looking at anyone, it's looking at this dude, who the sister said was in prison the day that the Luke sisters disappeared, which was yesterday, 8 years ago, from a bus stop near their home in Saipan, except that that's not altogether true. And we reported this last night. Well, we attempted to report this last night with the internet issues. It's not altogether true. In federal filings, this guy was known to be used by Department of Public Safety officers over in Saipan to conduct control buys. So he would be legally released from prison to conduct control buys against the political enemies or against the personal enemies of DPS officers. And this was the subject of a lot of controversy in Saipan, not in the Joseph Acosta Crisostomo case, but in the case against former Governor Benigno Fitiao, who faced prison time before he was pardoned by his successor, the late Governor Eloy Inos. And it was because he was releasing a prisoner from prison to massage him. And this was the case, and I think it was in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, or 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Then there were the indictments and the convictions against several DPS officers for their release of prisoners and for a sex trafficking ring that they were all involved in with the Mama-san, who was also charged with federal crimes. It's just this incestuous relationship, and the people who are hurt here have been children. And to this day, the family of these Luke sisters, they don't know what happened to these girls, who were, I believe, 9 and 11 at the time of their disappearance. But the FBI offered a $25,000 reward for someone who could lead them to where the Luke sisters are, dead or alive, and which would give them, I suppose, the legal tools they need to pursue a case against Joseph Acosta Crisostomo, who we believe is at the top of their suspect list for the person who did whatever he did to make the Luke sisters disappear. That $25,000 that's a hefty fee that the FBI is doling out, and it's because it's an incentive for people, and there are people, guarantee, there are people who know whether Joseph Acosta Crisostomo on yesterday, 8 years ago, was released from the Cagman Detention Center. Knowing whether he was released will circle in even closer to the suspicion that he's the dude who made those Luke sisters disappear. We have a similar case here on Guam with Deandra Borja, the 18-year-old girl, very reclusive, who went walking her dog one night and didn't come back home. She lives right past the Mangilao Golf Course with her grandparents' ranch. And if you look on the map, here's the Mangilao Golf Course on this side of Route 15. There's a road right after it, and that's where she was walking her dog. Right down the street, at the start of the Mangilao Golf Course, or just right after you start the Mangilao Golf Course, but on the left side is the street where Paul Moffness lived. And this crime happened after Paul Moffness was paroled from office. So we asked the Guam Police Department a few weeks ago, when Paul Moffness was under interrogation. He was arrested already, he was under interrogation. We asked, are you guys asking about Deandra Borja? And the response from the police department was that they were focusing on the crime against a 10-year-old girl. Fine, it's several weeks later now. Have they asked about Deandra Borja? Because I don't believe in too many coincidences in life. The fact that this girl fit his liking of these young girls, that she was reclusive, that he had been already 1 year out of prison, and someone who has an insatiable appetite to rape young girls. That he lived right down the street from her. This should be at the top of the police department's radar in the Deandra Borja case, and I hope that the police department has some sort of appreciation for the fact that Deandra Borja's family is still going through a lot. They want to know what happened to their daughter. The mother wants to know what happened to her daughter. And it's my understanding that she went to police after this Paul Moffness thing, understanding that Paul Moffness lived down the street from this home. Not knowing that until this information about him was released, we were able to find it in the Guam Sex Offender Registry. It doesn't take too much effort to see these things and to connect the dots, just like we were able to connect the dots in the Tamika Nauta case. Months before Brandon Acosta was arrested based on a confession that he made to a cellmate while he was at the Department of Corrections for a different crime. We here at Kandit connected the dots, and we said, and I explained this last night, and I explained this in a newscast that we did months ago. I was at Johnny Rosario's house, and when we put the dots together, I went live, and we explained this entire thing about how the address matched up, how there was this coincidentally, there was this CID drug raid, not Mandania Drug Task Force, but CID drug raid at the Acosta house, which happens to be one of 6 homes in a secluded neighborhood of just these poor families, and with robberies that happen in every single one of these homes, except what wasn't reported was any robbery at the Nauta home, all in the same night that Tamika Nauta was murdered. So we put it together by process of elimination this, and by deductive reasoning that, and by connecting the dots. We came right out and said Brandon Acosta is a murderer. It took months for the police department to make the arrest. And so we're left to wonder, is there a sense of urgency on this island? First of all, to protect children from predators, and then when these things happen, to bring their predators to justice. And if a child's life is lost, while there is nothing that can be done to fix that because the child will never come back to their parents, at least some sort of justice in this community against the perpetrator. Not merely to show an example, though that's important, but to take the predator off the streets so that they don't do it to another child. That's what's most important in a situation like that. And so we have to commend the Guam Police Department today for taking one such predator off the streets, and that is Marlene Ewely. I think Ewely or Elowy or whatever. And before I get into the phone call that I got from Jericho Zion David's mother, Jenny David, it was just a heartbreaking phone call. I want to say something about something that I saw in the comments on the story that came out on the post. Let me just find it real quick. It was so disgusting. It makes me sick. And one of the things Miss David, was she was lamenting was that she's faced some criticism. Her family has faced some criticism and some judgment about, what was baby Zion doing on the street. I'll tell you what the fuck he was doing on the street. He wasn't on the street. He was in a cul-de-sac where children play. Lots of children, they play. And that's why the family, not just their family, but lots of other families who live in cul-de-sacs around this fucking island asked their mayor to put a goddamn speed bump there. Yeah. And then they asked their neighbors to slow down while they're driving, because there are always kids playing. There are basketball hoops that are like in the center of these cul-de-sacs. Always kids playing. There are kids in those little tricycles, those Tyco tricycles, always going through these are neighborhoods. Urban neighborhoods packed with families. That's what that kid was doing. there, this, so there was, this really fucked up post that I saw from a family member of this Marlene Evelyn, and it says this. It's from Jazzy Boo Noel, and he says, before you motherfuckers write some bad comments, y'all better just shut the fuck up. You motherfuckers don't even know the real fucking story. BWI Kajok Iotek, because these motherfuckers don't even know what fucking happened. And to the family of the boy, fuck you all, you ice head motherfuckers. Shit like this wouldn't happen if y'all wasn't turning the fucking pipe and y'all was watching your kids. Shit wouldn't happen if your stupid fucking relative didn't run over that boy. And don't you fucking talk about this family, you dumb fucking piece of shit. This grieving mother and father, their boy died. You're gonna have your relative for the rest of her god-awful, disgusting, fat existence, hopefully at the Department of Corrections, for the rest of her life. What do these parents have? Because of your stupid fucking relative, huh? They're not gonna have their baby back. The fact that she got arrested, what a small measure of justice for them. Nothing. There is nothing that can be done in this justice system that will make things right for Jenny and Rick David. Nothing. And all of their relatives who missed that child. Tadza, ni hafafet. Nothing. And then you're gonna blame it on the pipe? Well, I'll tell you this. When I was on the pipe, I never hit a kid. Everyone I know who was on the pipe never hit a fucking kid. Well, so Marlene Evelyn may be the most sober person in the world. Hey, congratulations to her sobriety. She hit and killed a kid because she didn't know how to slow the fuck down in a neighborhood. Even though everybody told her to slow the fuck down. Even though she knew that there were kids in the neighborhood. That she would defend a scumbag like that makes you a piece of shit amoeba. You know who also was sober and not on the pipe when they decided to hurt kids, give them a little something, something? Paul Moffness. Sober, not on the pipe. Like to rape girls. Charles Lacey. Like to rape boys. Not on the pipe. The dude over at Superior Court left his daughter in the truck. She fried in the hot sun. Not on the pipe. He didn't get any jail time. Yeah. So stop it with this whole pipe thing. Stop trying to rub off. Stop trying to appropriate your guilt on other people who don't meet your moral standard. Because as far as I can see, these were sober people with fucked up problems who did these things. It ain't about that pipe. It's about following the goddamn law and slowing down. Watching your driving in a neighborhood. Don't fucking speed in a goddamn neighborhood. And don't hit kids. And when you do hit kids, you better be fucking right. You better be prepared to take it. And if you're the relative, just shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up, because no one wants to hear it. Everyone wants this bitch to burn in hell. And rightfully so, because she took this kid's life. I talked to Miss David earlier tonight. was a very heartbreaking conversation. She's not ready. Her family is not ready. They're numb right now. They're not ready to talk to the public, but they do want you all to know. She asked me to relay this to all of you who have been thinking of them and praying for them. And she very tearfully said that it gives them great strength and it helps them. And thank you so much. They really appreciate your thoughts and your prayers. And she kept saying, nothing's going to bring my boy back. But your thoughts and prayers help. So if you could find ways to communicate with the David family, whether it's, posting on social media, tagging them on your posts or your comments, on the news stories that are on all of the news stations, say some nice things to them. They really need these nice and kind words because they're going through a lot. And then say some really bad shit about Marlene Ewely and her stupid family because they deserve to hear all of it as well. They really do. And the one thing she said about Marlene Ewely and her arrest, though it won't bring her child back, is that, and she cried when she said this, is that maybe this will help to keep another child from being hurt. So, in that respect, good job to the Guam Police Department for taking that predator off the streets. It is not a measure of comfort to the Davids because the damage is done and nothing can undo that. But at least for their concern for other children, it helps them to cope with this, and it should give a measure of relief to everybody else who has kids, knowing that that evil bitch is off the roads, and hopefully the justice system does its job well and sends her away either for the rest of her life or long enough to understand what her mistake was and that she shouldn't be driving like that. And she should actually care about other people and not be as selfish as she is, stupid bitch. That wasn't the only story today about kids being abused. Then we found out in the story from the Guam Daily Post, credit to Mindy Uggan and her staff for covering the trial of this dude who was released even after it was found, even after admissions that he was sleeping with a 12-year-old girl. And Judge Benjamin, he saw and released him. It's like, what world are these judges living in? There's a disconnect in our society between our leaders and the people of Guam. And so the people of Guam, they're like, children are important, we love our children, and our leaders are like, we don't give a fuck. Not all of them. Not all of them. A lot of them, people who make decisions regarding children. And what's it gonna take? I remember when I was a kid, there was this huge surge in child abuse. And at the time it was parents who were abusing their kids, or like family members abusing their kids. And there was a song called Dear Mr. Jesus. And we had to learn it for elementary school. The ironic thing was that it was at St. Anthony's School, and who would have known? I would have been abused by a teacher at St. Anthony's School a few years later. But I digress. So it was a big thing. And we all had to learn this song called Dear Mr. Jesus, and it was this little girl, a 9-year-old girl named Shannon Matz or something, I can't remember, but it was like this Christian thing, or this Christian band. And it was about child abuse. And I thought it was a very appropriate subject because we're seeing this upsurge in abuse of children, not just by family members, but also by just complete strangers who are monsters, by the system itself who have failed these kids, by the systematic failure and cover-up of crimes against children, by doctors, by a hospital that is remaining mum on the death of Asher Dean Lebowski, by a clinic involved in his death, where they still employ the doctor who was negligent in his care of his pediatric client, Asher Dean Lebowski, who died in Halloween of last year. All these heartbreaking stories about kids. And I thought, there's a surge again. Kids are the victims. Kids are almost like the targets of society's violence. We spend so much time and energy uselessly fighting about things, about crimes that don't even rise to half the level of the crimes committed against children. And now we're at these crossroads in our society, these political crossroads, where we're calling upon our leaders to do something different. And up to today, it seems like, at least in our judiciary, things aren't changing. I don't know what to do about that. I'm not a political leader, but I hear what all of you say. We here at Kandit hear you. We cry with you. We are upset with you. And so one of us put together a video with that song, Dear Mr. Jesus, and you have it? You'll play it? We'll play that now, and this is the end of our newscast.
Dear Mr. Jesus, I just had to write to you. Something really scared me when I saw it on the news. A story about a little girl beaten black and blue. Jesus, thought I'd take this right to you. Just how big they are.